Greetings. We are nearing the end of the book of Revelation. And in fact, last week we finished in Revelation 20. We went through verses 1 through 4, well, really 1 through 6. But I stopped, I challenged you to look at verse 5, the 1,000-year wait. I mean, verse 5 might present a problem for some Christians. You'll find various interpretations of what this verse means, and you'll find some who prefer to ignore this verse. Many Bible scholars believe all Christians will live throughout the 1,000-year kingdom. But verse 5 says, the rest of the dead did not come to life until after the 1,000 years had ended. What are we supposed to do with verse 5? The rest would seem to refer to everyone not included in the first half of this paragraph of 4 through 6. That includes those who sat on the thrones, those who had been beheaded because of their testimony, and they never worshiped the beast and not accepted the mark of the beast. And then verse 5, the rest of the dead did not come to life until after the 1,000 years had ended. Therefore, the rest would seem to apply everyone that took the mark of the beast. Would that include the possibility of someone repenting after taking the mark of the beast, or does it simply mean all non-believers, those who took the mark of the beast? Verse 5 does not appear to agree with what so many modern end times experts teach. Something for you to think about. Many of them are going to say, everyone that took the mark of the beast, they just went to hell. That isn't what verse 5 says. Personally, I accept what the Bible says, and virtually every translation is correct when compared to what the original Greek manuscripts say. To state it clearly for you, I believe the rest in this passage refers to anyone who took the mark of the beast. Did you study it? Think about it. What do you believe? And then verse 6 goes on after verse 5. It says, that was the first resurrection, referring to those who had been beheaded. The passage continues in verse 6. Those who share in the first resurrection were blessed and holy. The second death had no power over them, but they will be priests of God and of Christ. They will reign with him for 1,000 years. So the second death had no power over them. What is the second death? Well, Revelation 2:11, which we looked at weeks ago, says the one who is victorious will not be hurt at all by the second death. Revelation 20, verse 14, just a couple weeks ago, says a verse, we've read it now. It tells us the lake of fire is the second death. And now here, that's a verse we haven't gotten to yet. I'm sorry. We're going to get there shortly. And then even further on, Revelation 21:8, another verse we haven't read yet, tells us the fiery lake of burning sulfur is the second death. Clearly, our physical death is the first death. The lake of fire is a spiritual death, the second death, the eternal death. All right. Revelation 20, verses 7 through 10. After the 1,000 years are over, Satan will be freed and will deceive all the nations on earth, Gog and Magog, and he will gather them for battle. His army will be like the sand on the seashore. They will march from every area on earth and will surround the camp of God's people, the city he loves. Fire came down from heaven and consumed Satan's army. Satan, who had deceived people, was thrown into the lake of burning sulfur, the same place the beast and the false prophet had been thrown. There they will be in torment forever and ever. I mean, this paragraph's fairly easy to understand. Satan will get one more chance to deceive people, and take note, he will lose. Yeah, imagine that. Everyone foolish enough to follow him will end up in the same place as Satan, the fiery lake of burning sulfur, second death. With all that has happened, it boggles the mind to think that some who have been faithful even through the 1,000-year reign will be deceived. But that's what we read here. Satan gathers a numberless army, like the sands on the seashore. Then again, as we look through the Bible and mankind's history, it is amazing how easily people can be when it comes to believing in, how easily deceived people can be when it comes to believing in and trusting in God. Obeying God. We also see that God does not need any help whatsoever. We say that God will take care of us and God can win any battle. Do we really believe that? Read that again. John tells us that this numberless army will surround God's city, coming from everywhere in the world, and they will simply be destroyed by fire that came down from heaven and just devoured the army. And as mentioned already, the devil will be thrown into the lake of burning sulfur, where the beast and the false prophet were thrown 1,000 years before. And there he will suffer eternal torment. Verses 11 through 15. John writes this: Then I saw a great white throne, and I saw the one who was sitting on the throne. The earth and the heavens fled away from him. There was no place for them. I saw the dead, both important and not important, and they were standing in front of the throne, and books were opened. Another book was opened, the book of life. The dead were judged according to what they had done, which was recorded in the books. The sea released those who had died in the sea. Death and Hades gave up those who had died. Every person was judged according to what they had done. Then death and Hades were thrown into the lake of fire. The lake of fire is the second death. Every person whose name was not in the book of life was thrown into the lake of fire. This chapter ends with a vision of a great white throne and the one who was sitting on the throne. Again, John tries to describe what is indescribable. John is once again describing heavenly things in an earthly language. That what God showed him in the vision was shown in such a way that he could understand it. And maybe we could too. When we talk about judgment, most Christians think about the book of life. But here we see many books that are opened. These books contain a record of everything that has been done. It appears that the book of life contains a list of names, those who will live in heaven eternally. It seems that the book of life contains only the list of names. At least that's how I read this passage. And oh, by the way, have you ever realized how many times the book of life is mentioned in the Bible? Until I prepared this lesson, well, a couple lessons back, I've been through Revelation more than once. I did not realize. In Exodus 32:32, Moses asked God not to blot him out of the book. In Psalm 56:8, David says his tears are recorded on God's scroll. The book of life and the other books. Psalm 69:28, David asks that evil people be removed from the book of life. He says book of life. Malachi 3:16 says there's a scroll of remembrance that contains the names of God's people. In Luke 10:20, Jesus told his disciples to rejoice that your names are written in heaven. In Philippians 4:3, Paul refers to co-workers whose names are written in the book of life. And we've read the book of life in Revelation. Let me look at the list. 3:5, 13:8, 17:8, 20:12, 20:15, and 21:27. They all refer to the book of life. I want to do a little soapbox thingy about understanding Scripture. Have you ever considered the image we have of standing before the judgment seat of God? Could this be a description simply to help us understand the seriousness of how our lives will be judged? Have you ever considered that God could just send people straight to hell without even allowing them in His presence? They would immediately understand their sin. Those who went straight to heaven would also immediately understand where their salvation came from. 2 Corinthians 5:10 tells us that we must all stand before His judgment seat. But is this to be taken literally or symbolically? A question I ask often in the study of Revelation and in the end times. Well, a lot of the Bible. And this is exactly an excellent example of why I keep repeating the concept of scriptural or spiritual interpretation or symbolic representation. This is why we should be very careful when building our theology. One verse or even two can be very misleading if we try to apply everything in an extremely literal manner. This is why many say the Bible contradicts itself. If we understand the intention of the passage and what it's trying to teach us, we can understand the symbolism and thus the interpretation. And people, if one verse contradicts any other verse in the Bible, then that verse is wrong. Not the verse itself, but our understanding of it. For example, Habakkuk 1:13 says, God is too pure to look on evil, and Christians often say God cannot be in the presence of sin. We understand what they're saying, but shouldn't it be that sin can't be in the presence of God? Which is the greater? God, of course. And he is without limits, can do whatever he wants. He's not subject to anyone or anything. Sin, on the other hand, can be cast out of God's presence. Now, compare that to Job 1:6, which tells us Satan, sin, was in the presence of God. In Isaiah 6, the prophet says he was in the throne room of God in a sinful man. Let's consider the concept of God being omnipresent, meaning everywhere at the same time, all the time. And this is taught by most Christians. You can read God's own statement regarding this omnipresent nature in Jeremiah 23, verses 23 and 24. So if God cannot tolerate sin, he cannot be everywhere because he could not tolerate us because we are sinful. As Peter said in Acts 2:38, when we became a Christian, we're given the gift of the presence of the Holy Spirit, God. Aren't you thankful God tolerates sin in order to bring us closer to him? These are examples of how we can be misled if we try to apply everything in a literal manner. And I want to go back right to the beginning of this. Habakkuk 1:13 says, God is too pure to look on evil. And yet, he looks at us. Remember that when God shows us and teaches us about heavenly things, he must use language and examples that we will understand. Hopefully that will help you understand Scripture a little better and perhaps help you understand why it is so very important that we take Bible study so seriously. Now, John used a phrase in this passage twice, judged according to what they had done. The first time he used it referring to the dead were judged according to what they had done. And the second time it was referring to everyone judged according to what they had done. Nothing overwhelmingly significant, but I found it interesting. Why? I don't know. Just something I noticed. But John then tells us that death and Hades were thrown into the lake of fire. He mentions this a few times in the last few chapters of Revelation. It's important. Death and Hades were thrown into the lake of fire. So was Satan and everyone that rejected God. And here we read this. The earth and the heavens fled away from him, the one sitting on the throne. What do you think that's all about? Well, may I suggest this? Everything is just getting ready for the new heavens and earth. The earth and heaven just fled away from him because there's a new heaven and a new earth coming. I'm getting excited. How about you? Oh, and speaking of excited, I want to go back. Tribulation. I mentioned more than once things like, I'm not sure when the 7 bowls ended, or if they've ended. When does the tribulation begin? When does it end? One common belief is that the tribulation begins with the second coming of the Messiah. Some think it begins before that. Not a lot. Some think the Messiah comes halfway through the tribulation. Some in the early part. But then again, maybe the tribulation begins with the 7 seals, when the Lamb opened the first seal. Personally, I believe that when the tribulation begins, all mankind will know that something extreme has happened and is happening. Although perhaps some will need a little time to process all of this. So, ending, and that's where I was headed. Sorry, sidetracked. I have hinted at an outright question and challenged you regarding when does the tribulation end. The Bible does not include a statement, "Thus endeth the tribulation." And there have been multiple passages used by men over the years to signify the end of the tribulation. So I ask, when does the tribulation end? With the last plague in Revelation 16? Or maybe when Babylon the Great is destroyed in Revelation 18? Or perhaps after the great battle in Revelation 19? Most scholars tend to believe the tribulation ends with Revelation 20. And that makes a lot of sense to me. And then again, could it be in Revelation 21 when the New Jerusalem is established on earth? I don't know. Speaking of Revelation 21, now we come to the glorious end of the last book of the Bible. It is describing perfection, the reward for those who are faithful to God. Perhaps we should read the last 2 chapters every once in a while just to encourage ourselves. I know I like to do that once in a while. And what do we think of when we think of heaven? I mean, chapter 21 is a description of the New Jerusalem, heaven on earth. Let's read it. Verses 1 through 4. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. The first heaven and the first earth were gone, and there was no longer a sea. I saw the holy city, the New Jerusalem, coming from heaven, from God, and she was prepared as a bride that is beautifully dressed for her husband. A loud voice came from the throne, and it said, "Look, God's home is now among the people, and he is going to live with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them, and he will be their God. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain. The old way of everything has ended." Wow. John describes the New Jerusalem as coming from heaven, from God, prepared as a bride that is beautifully dressed. That would have been a beautiful sight. Can you imagine it? What John saw? And then John tells us, God will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain. The old way of everything has ended. But here's the same old question you've been asked repeatedly during this series. Is John describing a literal new heaven and earth? Or is he describing a symbolic representation? Let's consider what John said. The first question might be, what does he mean when he says there was no longer any sea? The new earth has no sea? That would be a literal viewpoint. So what would be a symbolic viewpoint? Think about it for a moment. What does the sea represent in Revelation? Well, the sea is mentioned in terms of the plagues that affect the sea. In Revelation 13, we're shown the dragon coming out of the sea, Satan. Revelation 20:13 says the sea gave up the dead to be judged. Those are probably the 2 passages of Revelation that speak of the sea symbolically. And doesn't it seem like the sea then represents not godly? I mean, Satan came out of the sea gave up the dead. And that fits with no longer any sea. In other words, There will be no more ungodly, no more sin. I think I might go with that. Verses 5 through 8. The one who was sitting on the throne, oh, I want to hear this. The one who was sitting on the throne said, I am making everything new. Then he said, write this down because these words can be trusted. They are true. He told me, it is done. I am the Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end. If someone is thirsty, I will give them water for free, water from the spring of the water of life. Those who are victorious will inherit all this. I will be their God, and they will be my children. Those who are cowardly or unbelieving or vile or murderers or sexually immoral or practice magic arts or worship idols or liars, they will be sent to the lake of fire and burning sulfur. This is the second death. Let's look at the list of those who will not be rewarded. It begins with cowardly. Does this mean those who do not speak of God before men? Kind of reminds me of Luke 9:26, where Jesus said, if someone is ashamed of me and what I teach, then when I return with God's glory and an escort of God's angels, I will be ashamed of those people. Of course, we understand when he says unbelievers won't be rewarded, or vile people, or murderers. What about the sexually immoral? This would include, if you read the rest of the Bible, homosexuals, adulterers, fornicators, and it sure seems like there's a lot of people living in sin, as we call it these days, even within the church. If you don't believe this, do your own research. You will find that far too many so-called Christians are living with someone to whom they are not married, and the polls tell that that's very true. In almost every church in America today, there's probably somebody living with somebody they're not married to in a sexual relationship. Those who practice magic arts, they don't get rewarded. People who worship idols aren't going to receive their reward. But the most interesting group is mentioned last, and easy to skip past. Liars. Liars will not get their reward. The Greek word used there implies people who habitually lie. You know, how often do we lie without even thinking about it? Some of my old favorite examples. He's not here. Can I take a message? Yeah, they want you to call them back, okay? I just hung up. We use it so often, and most people don't believe it when we say, I'm sorry, they're not here right now. How about this lie? I love it. Lots of times we say that and it's not true. I love your idea. Yeah, right. I love your cooking. How about this line? If you ever need any help, just call on me. I'll be there. But when the time comes, we're too busy. Hello, can you help me? What? You're busy that day? I haven't told you what day. I'll help. Right. I hear a lot. Pastor, I'll pay you back every penny you gave me. If people paid me back every penny I ever gave away, I'd be a very wealthy man. Well, I am kind of wealthy. God provides. How about our rationalization on topics such as taxes? It's okay to fudge it a little bit. The government's got enough money. After all, you've earned it. My viewpoint is not what's important here, and frankly, neither is yours. The only viewpoint that matters is God's viewpoint. Are you ready to face that one? All right, verse 9, chapter 21. One of the seven angels who had the seven bowls filled with the last seven plagues told me, come with me and I will show you the bride, the wife of the Lamb. Oh, usually the angels are not identified, but a couple times we're told one of the 7 angels of the 7 bowls. Is there any significance to that? Not that I can discern. But it's worth some thought, don't you think? That's kind of redundant. It's the kind of question, though, a serious Bible student would ask. I tried to find one for you. I couldn't find significance. Verse 10 through 11, this angel, he then carried me away in the spirit to a huge and very high mountain, and he showed me the holy city, Jerusalem, as it came down from heaven, from God. The city was shining with God's glory, and it was brilliant, like a very precious jewel, like jasper that was as clear as crystal. Don't you want to see that sight? I mean, he says, I will show you the bride, the wife of the Lamb. And then he says, here, look at the city coming down. Is that the bride? Maybe. All right, and now we get to a description of that city. Verses 12 through 14, the city had a great and high wall with 12 gates, and each gate had an angel. On the gates were written the names of the 12 tribes of Israel. There were 3 gates on the east, and 3 gates on the north, and 3 gates on the south, and 3 gates on the west. The wall of the city had 12 foundation stones, and on them were the names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb. Think about what John's describing. Each gate had an angel. That would be impressive. 3 gates on each side. Do you think north, south, east, and west are just symbolic in heaven? I mean, on some islands, the cardinal directions do not have a cardinal, north, south, east, west. They do not have a lot of meaning because some islands are kind of canted to one direction or another. Do you think heaven's like that? Those directions don't mean much, but we're given so we understand? And with 3 gates on each side, it would make sense that the gates being named for each tribe of Israel would be organized in the same manner as the tribes were organized when they were marching in the wilderness for 40 years. Have you ever thought about that? Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun were on the east. Reuben, Simeon, and Gad were on the south. Ephraim, Manasseh, and Benjamin were on the west, leaving Dan, Asher, and Naphtali on the north. Yeah, you can look that one up too. In verse 15 to 17, the angel who was talking with me had a measuring rod of gold so he could measure the city and its gates and its wall. The city was laid out like a square. It was as long as it was wide. He measured the city with the rod, and it was 1,400 miles on all 4 sides, and it was just as tall as it was wide. Then the angel measured the thickness of the wall, and it was 212 feet thick. Just keeping things straight, but this angel was one of the angels holding one of the 7 bowls. All right. A perfect breaking point, don't you think? The angel just measured the new city. And I want to challenge you to look at what dimensions were given in your translation. In my paraphrase, I said it was 1,400 miles on each side, and frankly, 1,400 miles straight up and down, and that the wall was 212 feet thick. Check your translation and see what it says. Check a couple others, and we'll begin again right there.